Welcome back to another episode of The Hit. My name is James Layton, CEO and founder of Anderson James. This is the podcast where every single week I bring you a leader from our sector to discuss some of the biggest challenges in UK housing today. Today I was delighted to be joined by Denise Fowler, Chief Executive of Phoenix Community Housing. We talk about the impact that social housing's had on Denise's life from a very young age and is very close to her heart, having transformed her and her family's life growing up, the journey of her career and how she's become Chief Exec of Phoenix, a resident-led HA in London, and some of the amazing initiatives that they're involved in to break down the barriers between organisation and her team and the tenants. Some of the amazing initiatives such as Chat and Chips, the Phoenix Academy, which is a social housing school, and the Hardship Fund, which has helped tenants to get back on their feet in the face of the cost of living crisis. If you like this episode, which I'm sure you will, I'd ask that you like and subscribe. Denise, welcome to the podcast.
It's very nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm excited for this one. I really am. I've seen some of the content, so I'm really looking forward to it. As customary, would you mind just giving us a bit of an introduction to yourself, if you don't mind?
Yeah, that's fine. So I'm Denise Fowler. I'm Chief Exec of Phoenix Community Housing, which is a housing association with about 7,600 homes in South London, and it's resident-led. So the majority of the people on our board are residents, and residents are involved in decision-making at every level. I came to Phoenix from another housing association, Women's Pioneer, which was a housing association for single women set up by suffragettes in 1920. And then I've had a varied career before that. So I was the housing ombudsman, deciding complaints in England for 2.5 years. And before that, I was a senior lawyer in government, including director of legal services at what's now DLUC, head of commercial law for DWP, head of employment law, head of planning law, did all sorts of things there. And before that, I was a community worker and a welfare rights advisor. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
I love to ask this anyway, but kind of why housing for you? Was it a choice? Did you fall into it? Kind of why did you get into the sector?
Yeah, for me, it's really personal. So my family were homeless from the day after I came out of hospital, actually. My mum and dad brought me out of hospital as a baby, and they were going to be staying with my dad's parents. There was a family row and they were kicked out on the streets with a newborn baby. And there weren't many other relatives we could stay with. So my parents sofa surfed and then, moved through a succession of really poor quality housing. And some of it very unsafe and insecure, and a point where we were renting one room from an old guy with a shared bedroom and a shared kitchen. As a result of those conditions, I ended up having a life-changing accident and was in hospital for months. And when I came out, we still wasn't anywhere for us to live because the Homeless Persons Act wasn't in place by then. And we ended up living in a caravan on a garage forecourt for a while, and then slowly moved around other places. And eventually, when I was 6, we got a council house, and it transformed our lives. And my 2 younger brothers, one of them was born in that housing, so he didn't go through what the rest of us did. But, it meant we could have friends locally. We could go to school. We had the same doctor. It basically was the springboard for the rest of our lives, having that. And we literally went from these really awful places into a 2-bedroom house with a garden. And we just couldn't believe our luck. And there was a pan outside. I could play with the other kids. It was, I went to a really nice school and knew people locally, and it just transformed my life. So housing's always been there. So when I worked in the voluntary sector, I was a welfare rights advisor and then a housing advisor, and then went from there to becoming a housing lawyer, working. I set up a practice working for tenants, so we advised tenants, and then I was poacher turned gamekeeper, and went into government and drafted lots of the housing legislation, and then got involved in other areas. Before that, I qualified as a lawyer, did all sorts of other stuff as a lawyer, but in government did got to see the big picture stuff about policy nationally and how that impacts and had an influence, and worked with ministers, and that was great. But that all started and then I've done things since, which I started to talk about, but it all started from that secure home. I think if you haven't got a secure home, it's very difficult to do anything else. It's your place of safety. It's your place where everything else comes from, really.
Yeah, and it's such a nice, like, you don't hear many, but like there's such a nice way to hear a story that's ended in such a great way, because kind of it's inspired and informed your career by the sounds of it anyway. But also kind of what have you seen, because you've been around social housing all your life, what have you seen as some of the evolutions in the sector in that period, would you say? Because it's got better, clearly, because the Homelessness Act is in and there's some other stuff, but long way to go. But what have you seen as some of the evolutions?
Yeah, and I think it's gone up and down as well. So, you know, when my parents were looking for housing, you had to be on a waiting list, and it was basically time served. And because they were homeless, they couldn't build up that time served in any one borough. They were just moving around wherever they could get housing, and so they didn't do it. And then they were pretty much in the position of Kathy Come Home, you know, that Ken Loach film that talks about that was my parents, really, with me as a baby. And then when the homeless persons legislation came up, there was a greater focus on those in greatest housing need. But then some of the people who just were waiting in poor quality housing but never homeless didn't get housed. So, you know, I think housing policy is always shifting and changing. We're always thinking about what's the best approach and where should we be focusing. And there's always a bit of a tension between supporting existing tenants and building more homes for new tenants. And that continues today, I think. I really welcome now, though, the increased focus on the quality of homes, because I grew up in housing very similar to Phoenix's. So Phoenix has got, it's an old cottage garden estate. After the First World War, the government funded housing fit for heroes. And so they had really high standards for the housing. And the core of the housing that Phoenix manages is just like that. It's street properties built in the 1920s and 1930s with front and back gardens and pans in front of them for children, and some flats, but they're low rise, and a strong focus on a sense of community. I mean, we've even got a pub on one of our estates that we own and we lease to someone else to manage, and it's a real community hub. It's brilliant. And I grew up on an estate which is sort of 4 miles from Felix's last place, which is very similar, the Middle Park estate in Elton. And they were really good quality homes, and they were aspirational. You felt you'd really achieved something when you moved into one of those homes. And it really was transformative, for not just for me, but for lots of other people. And that's where we need to get back to in social housing, really, where social housing isn't seen as a stigmatized tenure. It isn't something where it's the tenure of last resort and you'd only live there if you absolutely couldn't live anywhere else. You know, when I was growing up, these were mixed communities, and, you know, there were teachers on our estate and other people with jobs that no one in my family had ever had, but I could see that there was a way to get there and to do stuff. And if I worked hard enough at school, maybe I'd get there. And I think that's really important. And there was a sense of community. There was a park on our estate and all the kids used to go there, and there was a mobile library and youth clubs, and all of those things make a sense of place. And particularly for children, I think they give you a sense of opportunity. And even if your home life is quite difficult, you've got that. You can see a route through. It's
one of the pillars, right, in anyone's life. That has got to be the central pillar of anyone's life, a safe home. I mean, it shouldn't be something that we aspire to, really, should it? It should be a necessity in anyone's life. So I think we're getting there. And look, like you mentioned, women's pioneer housing. As I've done my research for this, you're a real champion of women's housing issues. So talk me through it. Why? You know, well, why is obvious, but you know, why was it so important to you? And talk me a little bit about women's pioneer housing, because I'm interested to just understand kind of some of the great work they do.
Yeah, I mean, I love housing history, and Phoenix has got this fantastic housing history, and so did Women's Pioneer. It was set up in 1920 by suffragettes and suffragists who worked together. So I think what Women's Pioneer shows is that, you know, the suffrage movement wasn't just about the right to vote. It was about wider women's emancipation, really. And there was this generation of women, a lot of whom were never going to get married, partly through choice and partly simply because so many men had died in the First World War, who had to make their own way in life. And there weren't any housing options for them at all. They could either live with their family or rent a room in someone else's house, or live in. There were very few hostels. There were these kind of hostel type places, but nowhere that provided a long-term, safe, secure home where women could be independent. And there's this amazing Dublin suffragist, Ethelred Browning. Ethelred isn't actually her name. She chose that name because it had a bit of a thing to it. And she set up Women's Pioneer. She worked with some of the leading people in the suffrage cause, like Helen Archdale, who, anyway, I won't go into the history too much. Helen Archdale, Ray Strakey, all these people are really well known in the suffrage movement, very close to Millicent Fawcett and all the Pankhursts. And what they did was they raised funding to convert some of the big family homes in Notting Hill into studios, 1-beds and 2-bed flats. And that's still the core of Women's Pioneer housing today. And they're still housing single women in London. They're amazing. They're in Notting Hill. So they're right next door. There's a billionaire, and then there's lots of single women on limited incomes. It's just fantastic. So yeah, I loved working for Women's Pioneer. And while I was there, it felt really important to make the case around women's housing across the sector. So I worked with some other women to set up the Women's Housing Forum, which is still going today, and campaigns across the sector to encourage all of us to consider, gender equality and what we need to do to make sure that housing plays its part in tackling that structural inequality. We did some brilliant work with the National Housing Federation, actually, we looked at women's overall income. So there's a lot of focus on the hourly gender pay gap. But because women often have caring responsibilities for children or older relatives or others, they're much more likely to work part-time and much more likely to have gaps in employment. And so when you look at women's average yearly income, it's much, much lower than men's. I think it was something like 34% lower than men's. And so then we mapped that income against rents in every region in the country and did men's average incomes as well. And what it showed was there wasn't a single region in the country where a single woman on an average salary could afford to rent a 1-bedroom flat.
Wow.
And there wasn't a single region in the country other than London where a man on average salary was in the same position. And even in London, it was more affordable for men than women. And that was so stark. So it really makes it clear that women are dependent on relationships in order to access housing often. It's very hard for single women on their own to access housing and live an independent life. And social housing, it then becomes really obvious why so many more women are in social housing than men. So all of that. Yeah.
Has that gap been plugged at all in the recent times? Just in terms of, I know there's been more spotlight, like you say, on the hourly pay, gender pay gap, but has it been plugged in the last couple of years or not? Are we still miles away?
No, I mean, what has happened is that housing has become even more unaffordable. So I understand there's now 2 regions where it's unaffordable for men as well as women now. So the South East and London, but it hasn't got any more affordable for women. And also for particular groups of women, it's worse. So it's much worse for mothers, for single women with children, and that's why so many people are in temporary housing, because they will be a priority for social housing under the Homes Persons legislation, but they will often be in temporary housing for a long time before they get a secure home. And then different communities, Black women are often, when you get intersectional inequality, are in a worse position. So we work with other people, and I was the co-chair, the founder and the co-chair initially, but now it's Tracy Downey, who's the new chief exec at Women's Pioneer, and Zoba Qureshi, who's the chief exec at Housing for Women, which are the only 2 women-only housing associations of around 1,000 or more properties in the UK. So,
And is the gap to be plugged just supply, in your opinion? Because why is it so unaffordable? I mean, like genuinely, why is it just a supply issue? What is the issue?
I think the biggest issue is supply of social homes. So funding has gone down over the years. In the 1980s, people got 100% funding housing associations could access 100% funding to build social homes. And if you've got a recession, then putting money into building social housing is counter-cyclical, and it provides work. And it's money it's investment, and that then pays back over the long term. So Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing we could do is build more social homes.
Yeah.
More good quality social homes which will last for a lifetime, the kind of homes that were built after the Addison Act. We need a new Addison Act, actually.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I agree. And I think as well, look, I think we're being deterred from building more at the moment. So there's a deterrent, really. It's difficult if you're a housing association right now and want to build, decarbonise, like all the other things that are at play. It's a real difficult challenge. I'm sure we'll come on to some of that. So as we just take the present day, just give us a bit of a helicopter overview of Phoenix as it stands today as a housing association.
Okay, so it's remains resident-led. So currently we've got 6 residents on our board, 5 are tenants, 1's a leaseholder. We've got 3 independent board members and 2 councillors. The chair and vice chair are both tenants. They're both amazing. It is one of the best boards I've ever worked with, and I've worked with a lot, and I've sat on boards, I've worked with boards. Honestly, they're really challenging and really capable, and just amazing. So Phoenix is G1 V1 under the regulators' standards, so highest level for governance and viability. When the new consumer standards come in, we want to be C1. We would be appalled if we weren't C1, so we're trying to work on that at the moment. And I think that explodes the myth in the sector, really, that we haven't got more tenants on our boards because they're not capable. Actually, if you invest in those tenants who want to be involved in the highest level of strategic decision making, then you can do it. And I think our Phoenix Academy is part of that, which maybe we can talk about.
We can, definitely.
But so Phoenix it's still resident led. It's got this great board, and then it's got overall we've got 7,600 homes. The majority of which are social rented, but we have about 1,500 leasehold and a very small number of affordable homes, which were the new developments under the old grant funding regime. And they're all based within about 3 miles of our office, which is the Green Man. It's an old pub which was knocked down and rebuilt as a community centre come office. So the ground floor is a community centre with a cafe, and it's where we can, people talk to their housing officers and bring individual issues, but both in the hub, and next door is the barn, which is another community centre, which is also licensed for weddings. So it really is something that the whole community use. But people can just come in and chill and sit. And today the sewing group we're in, everyone had material all over the place, and other days there's digital champions in, and we help people, use their laptops or their mobile phones or their tablets, and just give people access to support. And advice workers come in. We're just setting up things with the local primary care network, so they're going to deliver health services from the hub. So it's very much a community hub, and it's got an atrium, and the office is upstairs. So the office is open plan upstairs and with a big hole in the middle of this open plan office, which means that at every moment you're connected to the tenants. You can hear the tenants downstairs, you can hear what's going on. And to come into the office, you walk past the cafe, through the community hub and up into the office. So it really does break down that sense of them and us. Some of that stuff is really important, just how you set it up. So Phoenix is there, face all the same challenges that the rest of the sector does, just because we're a community gateway and residents are involved at every level. They're on, as well as being on the board, we have high resident representation on all our committees. Then we've got something called a Phoenix Gateway, which has got about 30 people on it, residents and we take ideas for new policies and principles that we're thinking about, or if residents have ideas, we explore them there at the Gateway. And then if we take them forward, they then go up to the different committees, including a resident experience committee, and then from there onto the board if necessary. So and residents are involved in all sorts of other stuff as well. So we always have a resident on our interview panels, and on every interview panel, it's usually one resident. When it was me, it was a whole room full of residents.
Right.
and they put me on I went into this room, everyone was around the walls of the room, and there was a chair on wheels in the middle, and I sat on the chair and they all fired questions at me. And I think one of the things was, can you cope? Will you engage with residents? Do you get? And it was fun. It was really fun. And they're on our procurement, when we evaluate all our contractors, there's a pool of residents who've been trained for that. And then we do other things like our chat and chips or our diversity events, which are all aimed at building trust and exploring particular issues with people.
Sounds honestly phenomenal. I've never actually interviewed anyone from a resident-led organisation before, and I'm really fascinated by it. But let's start with the positives. Like, what have been some of the really, really big breakthroughs that you've seen? Because you've worked in other businesses, you've seen other businesses.
Yeah.
What have been some of the big breakthroughs that you've been, without residents on our panel, we would have never done that. We'd have never done some of these things. What have been some of the real wins for you in the time you've been at the business?
So one of the things is just that at every stage, whenever we're developing a policy, we get that resident perspective. And that has often led us to change what we were thinking of doing or doing things differently. When we did the corporate plan, so we've just redone the corporate plan, and it's difficult times at the moment. There's the rent cap, we're all paying, we want to invest in our existing stock and deal with issues like mould, or making sure that we can get to carbon net zero by 2050, EPCC by 2030, fire safety, electrical safety, asbestos, water safety, all of those things. And at the time when there's a cost of living crisis and lots of our residents are finding it difficult to pay their rent, it meant that some of the things that we'd done over the years, we knew that if we wanted to do all of those things, we wouldn't be able to do some other stuff. And what made it different was we were able to go out to residents and explore those issues, and really say, well, so people feel really strongly about Phoenix doing a fencing program, repairing people's fences. But if it's a choice between that and investing to make sure that every home is warm, safe and dry, where would your priority be? And people said, you're going to have to wind down the fencing program for the next few years, and we're just going to have to focus on making sure that everything is well insulated and we've done the work we need to do to try to prevent damp. Or we used to have, the first year I was here, had this amazing Phoenix Festival, which was brilliant. It's a fun fair, all these different stalls, every aspect of the business was there, and they were engaging with people. It was just the most, loads of activities for children, as a stage and people performing. It was brilliant, but it cost us a fortune. And so talking to the residents, we said, we can either spend this money on the festival or we can put it in our hardship fund. And they said, cost of living crisis, forget the festival, we'll put it in the hardship fund this year. And instead we talked about, well, what can we do? Because there needs to be we need to keep the joy. We can't just do the basics. We have to keep a bit of the joy in the community. So instead, a part of the money that would previously spend on the Phoenix Festival, we've put into other local festivals on each of our estates. So there's the Bellingham Festival, and we funded the children's activities and some crafts things, and we had stalls there, and we just funded some of the basic costs of running that festival. And the same thing in Downham, and we'll do something in Whitefoot as well. So that we, instead of doing things on our own, we're doing more in partnership to make that money spread. But being resident led meant that we didn't get the kickback about cancelling the festival that we would otherwise have done, because people had been involved in that decision and made that choice themselves. So that's the big difference, that when we've got to make those hard choices, we've got a whole residents who will give up their time to explore those choices with us, and then we'll act as champions for the association. When, for example, something pops up on the local Facebook group, my comms team doesn't have to do it, because involved residents are on there straight away going, no, that's not the case, blah, blah, blah. This is what we're doing. So true. It's brilliant. I mean, it is so, but it has to be a proper partnership for that to work. People have to feel that you've heard their voice and you are acting upon it. Another example is the Gateway and then the Resident Experience Committee see all our performance information, including what residents think about different areas of our service. Our performance on our complaints dipped badly, and so we set up a focus group, and they did what we call customer journey mapping. So they mapped the journey from you've got an issue, you raise it as a complaint, what happens. And we did it with staff in one room and with residents in another, and then we brought people together. And what was amazing is that the staff had all these different things they were doing to deal with this issue, but loads of them were internal. So when you did it from the residents' point of view, it was, I raised my complaint, nothing happened. And then finally my complaint got resolved. And so it was really enlightening about that. We all know it in theory, but just the importance of keeping up that updating and engagement and communicating. And then we did something came from that group to through the governance structure up to the board, and it was agreed that we'd set up a specific complaints investigation team, and they would be the first point of contact. And we agreed the way they were going to do the reports, they're going to do everything else, and that's all been implemented. So that was all implemented within 4 months of the first issue arising. And it's great. It's really good to be able to go back, and some of those people who were involved in that customer journey mapping are then saying hello to the investigators and saying, you've got your job because of me. You wouldn't be here if it wasn't for me. Great. Brilliant.
It's brilliant, and it gives you an instant feedback loop, doesn't it? Like instant.
Yeah,
you don't have to implement something and then hope it's going to land well. It's kind of, you picked it, you chose this, and that's a really interesting thing. What have been some of your challenges? Because I appreciate resident-led and you're involved in residents at every stage, but what's been some of the challenges of that? Because I presume there's been some in terms of sometimes the business decides one thing and residents want another thing. How does that sort of work itself out?
To be honest, that issue has been less of an issue than I expected, largely because the residents who are involved have such grounding. So Carmen, who's our chair, did 3 years as a board member, 3 years as a vice chair, and then is now has been the chair for 2 years. She's got 1 more year to go. So she knows Phoenix inside out, not just from a resident perspective, but also at the top level, because she's got all the information. And at every other level as well, we do a lot of work to make sure that people know that their role isn't just to come in and say, oh, my neighbour said this, but to look at. So we survey all of our residents. We do a tenant survey every year. We do it 4 times a year. We do it in each quarter. And each quarter we survey, and it's anonymous. It's done by an independent organisation, so people know they can say exactly what they want. And we ask all the tenant satisfaction measures, and then we ask, what does Phoenix do well? Where can Phoenix improve? And critically, do you have a current issue? And if you have, are you happy for this independent firm to pass your details on to Phoenix so that Phoenix can tackle that issue? And what that means is residents feel heard. Yeah. And we've got really good information about what they think is good or bad about our service. And we get the list of all of the things that were raised on the survey, and that comes to the exec team to say these things have been picked up, this one's resolved, this one hasn't. So next time when someone gets asked to fill in a survey, they say, yeah, because last time they did it, this issue that had been bugging them got dealt with. So it builds trust across with tenants, and it's tenants themselves, as I say, who are then championed when there are decisions which not everyone agrees with. That really helps. We do have, the odd person who will pop up on Twitter, but it's really small. It's a really small number of people. It's not kind of the levels before. And then we try to act quickly when we do.
Love it. And you've mentioned so much previously, so I've got loads now, like literally loads of follow-on questions. But let's start with this one because I love it. The School of Social Housing, the Phoenix Academy. Tell me everything about it. I want to know. I love it.
So we're accredited with the Trust Institute of Housing. I think we were the first housing association in the country to do this. Amazing. Accredited to provide the CIH levels 1, 2, 3, and 4 locally. And all our staff are committed to delivering the levels. We get some people in to do some specific things like the legal module or things, but I've just done the history of social housing, for example, that module.
I can tell. You're a fountain of knowledge.
I love it. And any residents who want to do level 1, we'll fund them to do it. And then if you become an involved resident, we'll fund you to do the other levels as well. So if you commit to either sitting on interview panels or becoming part of the procurement panels or joining the Phoenix Gateway, we'll fund you all the way up to level 4. And then those people who've done that qualification and then come on to the gateway or the committees or the board, they've got that foundation knowledge in housing, which really does make a difference. And the housing, those courses are residents and staff together. We don't do a residents course and a staff course, which means that people learn together. So that builds a culture of partnership as well, because everyone sees that no one knows everything, and we're all learning together, and we've all got something to bring to a course. So we get really good feedback from them, and now we've got quite a lot of other organisations wanting to go on our courses, at least partly because of the resident input, and we're encouraging them to get their involved residents to attend and be trained through it as well. So it's great. I love the Phoenix Academy. I'm going to give out the graduation certificates soon. So
amazing. To be honest, like, I've been waiting to ask this all the way through, but you mentioned it, so you've given it away. But chat and chips events, like, tell me about those.
Oh, right. So I said that in terms of engagement and building trust, you can do the surveys. You've got the formal structure and people involved in the Phoenix and these different ways in which people can get involved. But that's not enough. I think you've got to go out to people and give them opportunities when locally near them. We've just done a big consultation about our resident involvement model, and one of the things people said is they wanted it locally. And for a long while, Phoenix have been doing this, and we're just expanding this now. We're going to do it over winter as well as just in summer. So we rock up on an estate with a chip van and stalls for all of the different the different departments within Phoenix. So you'll have repairs and leasehold, and the complaints team go, and the planned maintenance team, and the community engagement team, and the income team, and the welfare, the financial wellbeing team. People are all there. And the deal is, if you go around and talk to someone from each of those teams and you get a sticker, then you get free fish and chips, or halloumi and chips, or chips. And then we have like gazebos and chairs out, and people sit down and they chat to their neighbours over their fish and chip supper. And once all the residents have got theirs, then the staff get it too for giving up their time and doing this. And then they all sit down together and chat, and then it builds a community. And it gives us brilliant feedback, which we then compare with the feedback we get from the surveys. And it's amazing how the same issues come out. But sometimes we get a local issue picks up, and we find something there which wouldn't show up as a big issue on the whole survey because of the numbers, but is important to a small group of residents. So that's great. And I think equally great are all our diversity events. So we do International Women's Day, Pride, Black History Month, Disability Awareness. We're doing something for Why Don't Men Get Involved this year. There's another one, so it's a Men's Day. And those events are brilliant because we always do nice food, and then there's nice activities like, I think for the Pride event, everyone could get a hand massage, and there was a Zen zone that you could just chill out in. And there's activities for children. And then there's always a discussion about something aimed at giving us more knowledge about what we need to do for our business. So at one point, we did it around same-sex families and what do those children need. And this year we talked about the importance of visibility, and people talked about it. And for Black History Month, we had someone talking about health inequalities, and particularly that led to a really, really in-depth discussion about the treatment of Black women in labour and the high mortality rates for Black women. So there's all this fun stuff, but there's also a core of, right, these are real things that our residents are going through that we need to discuss, and we need to link up with other organisations locally to tackle and to think about what we do. So all of that. Those diversity events, actually, 39% of the people who came had never attended another resident involvement event. So sometimes, breaking things down and making particular groups feel that they're being heard and that there's a space for them to talk about the particular issues, helpful. And it's helpful that we've got a diverse workforce, and people will talk about their own experience and things like that as well. So,
there's honestly, the overpowering message that you give me is that you have broken down all barriers that I've ever seen in any other housing association, and you've created a fun place where people can celebrate their differences, but also you can tackle some really hard hitting issues at the same time. And it's the first time I've said that, to be fair.
That is the aim. We don't always get it right, but it's a lovely place to work and I think to live, and that's the idea. And actually, some people do both. Quite a lot of our staff are also residents of Phoenix, so they also hold us to account for all of that as well.
Yeah, and you've mentioned it so many times. The other thing that comes through from you specifically, I think probably because of your background and where you were when you lived in social housing, is the quality and the sustainability and the high environmental standards. Like, tell me a little bit more about that, because you told me a story, I think it was off camera, about Carmen in terms of Yeah. Like what was that? Just give us a bit of an oversight of that.
So Phoenix has very and often tackles things that are really tough. The first development Phoenix did was of a very high environmental standard extra care scheme, first building, which won awards. Of course it did. This was before my time, so I'm not taking any credit, but it just was, why would you start with that? But you did, and it's brilliant, and it's a really big success still. And, again, that has a cafe on the ground floor, and it's a really lovely place. So all of the standards are really high quality environmental standards. Some of our more recent developments are actually passive house, so we've gone through the whole accreditation for them. But yeah, the story about Carmen is, and all our nominations are by the council. So our allocation, the fact that she was the chair of the board had no impact on the fact that she was allocated this property. But there's a policy in Lewisham's allocations, policy that you can downsize. And so she downsized from a 3-bed to a 2-bed and moved into this flat in one of the new developments, which has really high environmental standards. And she was a bit wary of moving, I think, initially because the rent was higher because it was built during the affordable housing grant regime. Yeah. But she talks to other tenants about the fact that the bills are so low. She said she didn't put her heating on until February. And I mean, it was really cold in January, but she said, no, I didn't need it until February. And so overall, it's costing her less. And it's a really beautiful home. Our space standards are higher than, are required by the GLA funding or other things. And so we build a lot of smaller properties, which then enable people who are now under occupying family homes. They see them, love them, and move into them. Unlike, I think a lot of housing associations think, well, why don't people want our sheltered housing? And you look at it and it's tiny and miserable and, there's nothing about it. Carmen talks about hers as her penthouse because it's got a lovely wraparound balcony and she grows loads of plants and stuff up there. And I think that's what we should be aiming for. We can tackle it. Can I just talk a bit about chain lettings and how that works?
Of course, yeah, please.
So developing those smaller homes can have a really big impact on housing need if we can do chain lettings, and we've agreed this with Lewisham. So when we built Hazelhurst Court, which was, we refer to it as an extra care scheme, but actually only a third of people need extra care, a third are independent, and a third like to have someone on site but don't need much more than that. And there were 60 new flats, and we said to Lewisham, well, you can have nomination rights to 40 of them straight away, but can we try to see if we can meet as much housing need as possible with the other 20 by doing connected lettings, really? And for those 20 properties, we managed to meet 73 people's housing needs because people moved from parlour houses, which are effectively 4 beds, straight into Hazelhurst, because these were older people whose families had grown up, and often they were only living on the ground floor of these properties, and they were, difficult to heat. And so they moved in. We were then able to do that property up. Someone in a 3-bed moved to a 4-bed, someone in a 3-bed, and maybe that someone in a 1-bed moved to the 2-bed. And across the piece, 73 people were housed in accommodation that better met their need as a result of those 20 homes. So I think it is challenging at the moment. It is really difficult, but things like that make a real difference. And having a good relationship with London Borough of Lewisham is what enabled that, because so many associations are tied by their nomination agreement and haven't been able to broker that kind of change. But because, again, it's all about trust, isn't it?
Of course.
Lewisham know that we are not aiming to do anything dodgy. We are genuinely trying to meet more housing need in the borough, and this works. And they ended up often getting the larger properties. So the moves went through and the property that they ended up getting was larger, whereas if we'd just given them the 1-bed, that isn't what they need on the waiting list. They've got 10,000 people on the waiting list, the majority of whom are families. So it was a win-win for both of us.
Amazing. And you've talked about this, and I think this is one of the biggest things that doesn't get talked about at the moment, but there's obviously the cost of living crisis is the biggest problem for all tenants and all residents. Like, forget all the other stuff. That is the number one to tackle, and everyone's struggling. But you've set up a hardship fund. Just tell me about the initiative a little bit, because I don't understand it fully. But it's obviously to tackle that issue, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we're not the only ones. Quite a lot of
Yeah.
associations have hardship funds. Some of them have bigger funds than we do, but we've got £100,000, and the idea, we've got a wellbeing team, a residents wellbeing team, who are really excellent, expert in benefits. Also have really good links with charity funds, do energy advice, have energy vouchers,
Right.
link in with the local credit union, do all sorts of things for people. But if they get someone coming to them and despite doing all of that, they're not able to resolve a financial issue for someone who is in, maybe needs to buy, maybe their fridge has broken down and they've got to buy a new fridge and there's no way they're going to get that big lump of money, then that comes out of our hardship fund. We do have the criteria that we try everything else first, and then if we can't, then we do that. And we have, we've bought people electrical equipment, we've bought beds for kids, we bought school uniforms sometimes, but it's there to fill that gap. And it's going to be, it would be oversubscribed if we didn't have those criteria. It'll all be spent this year, but it is part of this wider package. We do employment advice with people and do all of that as well. So, I think the cost of living crisis is so significant for people. And I think longer term energy efficiency is going to make a really big difference to that. So there's always that balance between what do we put into supporting people now and what do we put into building homes or doing up homes so that we can ensure that longer term our homes are more affordable.
I agree, and I'm seeing new developments, and I don't see why it would be any different for social rent and social housing, where people aren't paying bills, like zero bill properties. It's there. The technology is there. So I can't see it being long until we don't need to have expensive energy bills and all that. And hopefully that'll come soon. Obviously,
can I just come back on that because the difference for us is if they're for sale, then you can get that money back when you sell and you can recoup the cost. But at the moment, the costs for housing associations of getting to carbon net zero are massive, and rents are capped for a very good reason, but the funding, we really do need funding from government because we could get there much quicker and we could skill up the people who need to do it. It changes, it would reduce costs for the NHS because people don't get all the health related issues, and it would be so sensible if we did that.
It would be sensible, and it's no surprise that 50 chief execs on the podcast have said the exact same sentence. And so it's a systemic problem that we need to fix. We need more funding for things that are going to ultimately make residents' lives happy, tenants' lives happy, but also increase the environment and, like you said, the NHS and all that. So, have you seen the
NHS long-term plan for housing? So they've said that poor housing costs 18.5 billion, and the cost to the NHS is 1.4 billion a year. So it would cost us much less than that to fix the housing. It's a no-brainer to me, and I don't see why housing isn't seen as core infrastructure in society. When we talk about infrastructure, we talk about roads, we talk about grand buildings. Actually, domestic homes are the core infrastructure for the organisation, for the country, as is social care. Actually, we need to be looking at things like that as well. And when we think about the things that make it possible for people to live in a society and about infrastructure. Anyway, I'm on my soapbox.
I agree. And I think the infrastructure thing is so relevant because it becomes a political football. And I don't do politics on the pod, but it does become different changes, and we've got to just ride all these different changes. But actually, it needs to be a plan that's long-term and sustainable and stable. So we all know what we're doing and we can get on with it. Couple of last things for me. The main one is, massive engagement. As you'll know yourself, there's some challenges to come. What are you seeing as some of the biggest challenges, the main challenges that you're going to face in the next 5 to 10 years as an organisation, would you say?
I think, well, we talked about some of them. It is about the quality of housing. So the homes that we've got, we've got 7,800, about 6,300 of those kind of homes, the sort of cottage garden estates, and those are heading to 100 years now, and they're single skin, and retrofitting them, well, it has a number of challenges. One, it's really, really expensive, and two, it's it's going to change how they look. People love the fact they've got these brick built housing and they do look really nice. And the easiest way to retrofit them is to wrap them, but that's not great. So we've got a debate and a discussion with, have we got them? Can we afford it? And if we can, how do we want to do this? And what are the priorities for those? The rest of our stock is more diverse. Some of the street properties, some of the places in the 60s, and some of the challenges they have are different. So I think, like everyone else, there's going to be where do we prioritise investment in our existing homes? And like everyone else, we'll be increasing the data, but also engaging with tenants about the choices we've got. And that includes health and safety. And I would put, we've got damp and mould as a compliance work stream. It has to be, because it's potentially life-threatening. But also fire safety, asbestos, all of those things. Keeping all of those things, balancing all of those things against a limited amount of income, and at the same time trying to build some new homes for all the many people who are badly housed in this country. I said Lewisham's got 10,000 people on the waiting list. That's a massive underestimate, because you don't even go on the waiting list if you're not going to be a priority. So those are people who are in desperate need and who would qualify. The number of people outside, and the private rented sector in London is just collapsing at the moment. So I think there are some choices for us about whether, as part of our mix, we develop some sub-market homes that aren't, we've got a subsidiary, we might do some at sub-market rent that just meet some of that demand, particularly for young people in the area before they've had families and before they're a priority. And I think it's just a challenge balancing all of the things. You feel sometimes like I can't decide whether it's those people who spin plates or whether it's whack-a-mole where you're constantly doing it. I don't want to be in either of those positions. So a lot of it is about trying to foresee those stuff and plan it, plan them going forward and dealing with it. But I think Felix is pretty well placed to manage
good
all of those issues.
I think your level of feedback from a resident engagement is one of the highest in the sector, I would say.
I don't know anyone else who does 52% of their residents and we do it each quarter. And as I say, if you see the issue, then you can react immediately. So it's not just a set of stats. It is something that they are statistics, and there's a narrative that goes with them from the additional questions we ask, which is explored with tenants at board, gives us that depth of understanding. Well, why are people suddenly dropping on this? And, or why is that one doing so well? We get really amazing. One of the benefits we've got is 87% of our residents think we treat them with fairness and respect, which for a London housing association is pretty good. But it's only 76% when it comes to customer service. So the difference is our systems and our processes, and we've got to tighten up on those, and that's a real challenge.
Yeah, but I think what you have absolutely cemented and done amazing at is there's regular touch points. If I'm a tenant in one of your homes, I can have as many touch points or as little touch points as I want, but I'm always going to have a voice within it, which is amazing. Yeah. But you've seen probably that the RSH this week have announced consultation on consumer standards. How important is that going to be for the sector and for Phoenix, would you say?
It's massively important. And actually, having seen the framework, I think it's a pretty good framework. I think it's measured. It picks up on all the key issues that I want to be looking at. I'm really pleased that I think people define tenant empowerment in different ways. So I like the fact that this time it's about transparency, involvement in decision making. So it's not enough just to have some nice events. You've actually got to say how residents are influencing decisions. And then accountability. So are we telling residents, well, this is how we're doing, this is where we're doing well, this is where we're not doing well. No one does brilliantly at everything. And, so that openness and that honesty that comes through that framework, and the importance, I think, on having the information and the data, and the increased focus on quality and safety, I think is really good. I think it's a good framework, and I think it will give us something to test ourselves against, which we all need. We've been talking about it with the exec this morning and just going through and breaking down the different aspects of it, and what do we currently do and what do we need to do more of, and how are we going to involve residents in responding to the consultation and then to implementing the changes, deciding what changes we prioritise and how we implement them. So I think the regulator, in a tough situation, actually, there are so many things popping up across the sector, and the risk is that we all run after. I think the regulator herself, Fiona, said, who run after the latest ball, so damp and mould. Oh, forget everything else. Let's just do damp and mould. Oh dear, we haven't got our electrical certificates. Oh, we forgot to talk to the tenants. I think we have to get away from that as a sector. We have to, and that having a clear framework which says these are the expectations of you. We're not going to tell you how you do it, but at the end of the day, you have to show that you have achieved these outcomes is really helpful. And I think it's pretty good. Frankly.
I agree. And it sounds like you're right there. I mean, I wouldn't expect there to be loads that you've got to do based on what we've talked about today. The way you've broken the barrier between tenant and organisation, and it's not just something you've said, you've done it, you've physically done it, the way you set your office up, the way that you've created chat and chips, which I'm going to steal and use in my own business, I think. But just everything has just been so built around engagement and tenant satisfaction. And look, I'm sure there's loads of bits that you get wrong, but actually the overarching message for me on this podcast has just been, you really care about what they think and you really care about their opinion. And actually, it's making you a better organisation as a result.
It absolutely is. It completely is. And thanks for this. It's been really nice to talk it through. It's been really enjoyable.
Yes, thanks, Denise.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Hip. If you'd like to hear more from us, please be sure to follow us on your favourite podcast platform. We are also running a 30-minute clinic free of charge to any clients that want to recruit in a more inclusive way. For more information, please reach out to us on our website, andersonjames.com.